Welcome everybody to today's panel on some difficult issues that come with this pandemic. And that is, we know many of the businesses in our community are suffering. For some of you, this is very unfamiliar territory. You've been a very successful business for a very long time, and that you're used to the normal bumps of our economy, right? The bump of summer, if students are out of town, what happens when we have a hurricane and maybe we're closed for 3 or 4 days. We've endured the impact of some of the transitions on the university regarding Silent Sam and on-campus protests, but those are very different than what we are up to now. You know, heretofore, the worst thing that had happened to us was 7 days of no power in a hurricane or a winter storm. And we are now in week 21 of a very, very difficult time. And so we want to begin having the conversation just so you know what your options are with regard to restructuring and other ways to manage your business in tough times. We've got 3 panelists, experts that we've pulled together to help have this conversation. For those of you who are on the call, you have a Q&A sort of bubble at the bottom. You're just going to see the 6 of us. We know that this is a very sensitive issue, and we're going to give you the ability to participate anonymously if you want. When you do submit your question, you may submit it anonymously. We'll also share contact information with all of these panelists so that you're able to follow up with them. Afterwards, we will be recording and sharing out with you. We have joining us Adam Craig. Adam Craig is the newest employee at the SBTDC, the Small Business Technology Development Center. They are a branch of the University of North Carolina. Think of it as agricultural extension except for small business. So they have a full-time staff, it's prepaid in your taxes, and so you have access to them for free to help you with business counseling issues. They've become experts in PPP and idle navigation, but they also help with business plans and can help with these issues. He brings a background, a career as a CPA. He's one of the only CPAs employed by the SBTDC, and he's got 13 years of financial audit experience, and he was a certified fraud investigator. So if there are some bad things going on in your business, he will keep it to himself, but you could just confess it in advance because he's going to find it. Neely is a longtime friend of our chamber. He works at Blackman & Sloop as one of the partners there, has been my friend for more than 20 years now, a real expert in this area. He's seen he's seen the insides of most of the businesses in this community and has expertise in issues of restructuring, lots of different kinds and types of businesses that he has worked with over that time. A lot of work in tax compliance, advisory services, tax planning. We also have Clint. Clint works for Brooks Pierce. Brooks Pierce is a firm with, probably 100 attorneys across North Carolina, offices in Greensboro and Raleigh. He is a litigator. And if you check out his bio, it says he thrives in the courtroom. And so that's pretty exciting. But his experience has to do with intellectual property, bankruptcy, and some of those other challenges. So between those folks, also on the call that you can see here is Jensen. She's our community impact specialist at the chamber, and Vanessa Watson, who is our director of communications and programming. So I'm going to get started with a few questions. You heard me sort of frame up the challenges that we think the businesses are facing. And principally what we're hearing is about debt piling up. I was talking to a restaurant. They have a $25,000 monthly rent. They haven't paid it since February. That is $150,000 that is beginning to creep up. Even if the property owner were to allow them to spread that over the next 18 months, that would still be super painful. Neely, I want to start with you. As folks start to have, as debt begins to grow, the people they owe their vendors, they may owe credit cards, they may owe the bank, they may owe a landlord. What are folks' options in terms of renegotiating debt? What are you seeing and what are you advising?
Well, first of all, from a landlord perspective, you mentioned the lease deferment option. You know, I think what we saw, most landlords were initially granting, say, a 2 or 3 month lease deferral. We're now through that period from April now. So we are seeing kind of a second round of kind of deferments from a lot of landlords. I think the commercial real estate environment is very stressed right now. We have businesses that are abandoning their spaces. We have possible escalation in vacancy rates. So landlords, I think are showing a tremendous amount of flexibility in working with their existing tenants and clients, in pushing out some future obligations. I think they are also, they're looking at the business viability of what the COVID environment looks like post-COVID, and naturally, I think they want to hear from a business, a scenario or a plan where they see themselves being able to sustain their business and possibly come out favorably as COVID ends.
As folks start to see their bills pile up, what do you advise them? What is one of the first things that they should do?
Would you like for me to?
Please. Why don't you go Neely, and then I'm going to go to Adam and Clint on that one.
Well, I mean, I think, naturally there was a lot of federal stimulus granted or available for small businesses. You've mentioned the PPP loan and the EIDL loans. I think and then some other local or state, assistance programs. So I think you've got to look to see, if you've tapped out those or eligible for those, and you need to secure those because a number of them have forgiveness or non-repayment provisions. Naturally, the emergency disaster loan, the EIDL loan, is a repayment loan, but it has a 30-year term with a fixed rate of 3.75%. So we had some clients that initially didn't want a loan. They were looking at grants or forgiveness opportunities, but now they're looking at the EIDL loans because that's very inexpensive debt with very favorable 30-year repayment terms. Beyond that, beyond deferment discussions with landlords and banks, we've really asked them to go back to their strong vendor relationships and negotiate different types of terms. I mean, that vendor relationship has probably been established for a number of years. It's probably significant in terms of dollar amount, and they want that to continue in the future. So I think those businesses are willing to extend possibly additional credit or additional payment terms. But again, I think they're looking at, to the business, how are you coming out of this? What are you doing? What are you doing things differently to make yourself, viable coming out?
So what I heard from you, though, is you got to tell people that it's going on. You got to engage your landlord. You got to engage your bank. You got to engage your vendor. Some folks have been keeping their crisis to themselves. Keeping your crisis to yourself, I think, puts you in deep trouble. Adam, do you agree? What would you have folks do as they begin to have payments that they're struggling to make? What's some first early advice?
Yeah, I would mirror sort of Neely's thoughts there. Things are building up, and you have to think about landlords and the demand that's out there is one of the things. If everybody's struggling, you're not going to be easily to replace in their space, and it's a lot easier to maintain a relationship than it is to create a new one. So keeping an open dialogue with your suppliers, your vendor suppliers, your landlords, those that are providing for you, is a great way to do that. Again, mirroring what Neely said, there have been some funding options out there. Some of them have run out. The PPP is no longer available, but there are still some funding, and hopefully as Congress moves forward and the government moves forward, there'll be some other things, both from a federal, state, and local level. There are still some things out there. They're just a little harder to obtain, and if you don't maintain as best you can your payments, that sort of puts you behind the 8 ball for getting new funding too. So working with your creditors is a main step there.
Are folks willing to renegotiate? I know there's debt consolidators who are out there inviting people to consolidate their credit card debt, or can folks call their credit card companies? Are they having any success renegotiating, or with their bank or with their landlord or with their vendor? Are folks taking pennies on the dollar to resolve this through just negotiation?
I'll go ahead and I'll go ahead and take this one. So with respect to landlords, as everyone else has just said, the landlord can't realistically replace you. That being said, the landlord's hurting too, because lots of folks are not paying rent right now. So what the landlord is looking to do in a renegotiating session, what I've seen a lot of, in addition to the deferment, is I will convert you from the landlord saying, I will take a gross percentage rent for the COVID time period in exchange for the right to terminate the lease at any time if we're unable to work through this in the future, which ultimately winds up being a pretty good deal for the tenant with respect to saving a lot of money with respect to the landlord and the minimum annual rent that you'd otherwise have to pay. And it works out for the landlord because the landlord gets something in today, which the landlord wasn't getting, and then also helps gives the landlord the option to terminate in the future if we get through COVID and there's a better deal out there in the future. So I've seen a lot of that going on with respect to renegotiating with the landlord. With banks, I have not been in a situation where I've been trying to renegotiate with a bank for a business that is current on its payments right now. With respect to folks that have decided we're not going to make it and have closed their doors, then with respect to the folks that are not going to make it and have closed their doors, banks have been willing to take a substantial discount to get paid in a lump sum today. And I've negotiated 2 or 3 of those since the pandemic started. Credit card companies, I've never had any success ever negotiating with a credit card company ever. Maybe other folks have, but my general view of credit card companies is they have so many accounts that it's very hard to get somebody actually on the phone to renegotiate. And B, their general view is if you file bankruptcy, you file bankruptcy. It's just part of our doing business and we'll take the loss on that and move on to the next guy. So I wouldn't have a whole lot of belief that you can renegotiate with your credit card company, but with respect to your bank and with respect to your landlord, it's certainly worth doing everything you possibly can to see if there is a acceptable solution to all parties.
When you say that the bank will take a significant loss, what 10%, 20%, 50%?
I've seen 30%.
That they'll take 30% of what is owed to be done versus fight in a bankruptcy.
Correct.
And in terms of percent rent, we've seen 6%, 7%. Are you, if somebody were to go to their landlord and say, look, I can't pay you what I was paying you, but I will give you a percent of my gross revenue. What do you think that number, what kind of numbers are you seeing?
I was 5 to 10%. And the landlord obviously wants to know that you're actually open and that you're open to the maximum extent that you are permitted to be open under law to do that. But that is somewhere between 5 and 10% is what the landlord's going to be looking for.
If you were to put in order the most important people to pay first versus who they could stand not to pay, I remind people all the time that payroll taxes are not optional. Neither is sales tax. Those are 2 where the government does come. What advice would you all have in terms of if it's a big stack of bills, who to pay, who could wait? Anybody want to jump on that? Go ahead,
Sure,
Clint.
if you wanted to take, from a bankruptcy perspective, at the end of the day, you're obviously going to have to pay your taxes. You're going to have to pay, as you point, the sales tax and the payroll taxes. And you are also going to have to pay the landlord going forward. And you're also going to have to pay your secured creditor. So those 2 definitely come first. After taxes is going to be the landlord and the secured creditor. After that, you're definitely going to have vendors that you absolutely need to pay in order to keep things going. And last, unfortunately, is yourself. You've got to be able to pay everybody else in order to keep your business going. And to the extent that you have money left over, that's what's going to go to you. And through this COVID situation, unfortunately, that number is probably going to be fairly low.
So since the word bankruptcy has come up, I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. Just shy of that, Neely, Adam, what are the options, not bankruptcy, in terms of somebody wanting to restructure their organization or restructure who they owe money to? Are there options short of bankruptcy? Neely, what advice would you be giving someone before they get to that?
Well, I think what we're trying to get the businesses to evaluate, are they going to be a viable business, through the remainder of the year? Are they going to be viable post-COVID? Because many businesses may not. And so I think we have a lot of small businesses, similar to startup mentality. It's hard to say, no, throw in the towel and walk away. But you look at where you are now, and it may not be positive, but closing the business and trying to deal with the existing debts you have now and protecting your personal assets may be the best decision. To try to continue the business further down the road, waiting on maybe a second round of federal stimulus, that's going to require possibly, you putting in your own money, or you taking your personal assets and infusing those in the business, or extending debt personally. Your home equity, the equity loan is a common thing now that we're seeing people tapping the equity on their home to get some cash flow to infuse in their business. Those approaching family members, I think everyone would hate to see a family member's business fail, especially in a situation where they're providing for a number of family members. So oftentimes that's a tough discussion, but we see that. But ultimately you want to put money into your business and continue if you think it's going to be viable going forward. Naturally, in bankruptcy, friends and family that help you along the way are probably not going to be those. That there's tremendous risk. Those are low priority debts, but still, we're investigating that. We're definitely investigating, vendor renegotiations, as Clint said, and we're waiting patiently for the next 30 to 45 days, hopefully, for some second round of stimulus.
Adam, do you have advice different than that?
I would still mirror Neely's thoughts. I think small businesses need to take a hard look at how they're operating currently. Look at your burn rate, look at your cash on hand, figure out how long you can last. And I think Neely's point to, are you going to be viable post-COVID is a big thing. And can you be viable during COVID? I've got a colleague who tells a story of, a company whose business works during COVID, but their sales still dropped 75%. And when they took a hard look at it, it became obvious that their sales leads were generated through trade shows. And those trade shows are no longer happening in the same way that they were. So they had to figure out a different way to generate those sales leads to remain viable with their business. So, I'll do a shameless plug for the SBTDC. Contact us for counseling, and we can help you ask these questions of yourself. And again, we're a no charge service. So it's a deep business look to say, one, do you have the cash to stay viable? For how long, and will you remain viable through and after COVID? And that's sort of the approach you have to take. So that'll be the advice that I'd give pre-bankruptcy.
Let's stay on SBTDC for a moment. Will you describe who works in your office? What kind of services do you have to offer? How many folks are you guys seeing right now?
Right. The SBTDC in North Carolina has over 80 business counselors, general business counselors and specialty counselors. We offer general business advice for business counseling, focused on business foundations, money, market management. And we also have some specialized services for technology, government procurement, international business development, funding and equity, marketing and research, and strategy. So there's a lot of different things that the SBTDC offers. We also partner with the universities so that we have assistance from business schools and potential interns that may be available from the universities to help your business out. And the main focus of the SBTDC, though, is business counseling to help small businesses examine their business, grow, and move forward. And in this instance, maintain during an economic crisis here. So we will help you take a deep dive into your business and find try to give any insight that we can to help you survive, essentially.
Well, it is called business counseling. And to some of you, that may sound like business therapy. They will offer you some therapy likely because they are empathetic people, but the counseling really is about bringing your numbers, deep dives into your deal flow, where your customers are coming from, cost of operating, burn rate, Katie posted in the chat, hopefully the rest of you all can see, the best way, you go to their website and then you click to request a counseling session. I think you guys are getting back to people in 24, 48 hours right now.
Yeah, we've got a commitment to try to respond to the request for counseling within 24 hours. That's the specific UNC office. You'll also find on the website that we have some specific coronavirus resources that'll offer some great insight there. So there's a lot of information on that website. I just think a lot of people aren't aware of it as much as we'd like them to be. So dig through the website and see what you see there, and we can definitely offer a lot of assistance.
I encourage everybody to think creatively, both talking to CPAs, putting together a peer group, grabbing 4 or 5 people you trust and having them serve as a volunteer board of directors for you at this time to help you think through. Thinking about these issues in a vacuum or just with your staff can be really frustrating. There's lots of professional services on the attorney side and CPA. There's the free services with the SBTDC. There's a SCORE chapter of retired executives, and they will have counseling sessions with you. But when you think creatively, I think there's some non-traditional options. Locally, we had a business, they probably had $100,000 in vendor debt they owed their suppliers. They were able to get some cash, but then went vendor by vendor with their checkbook in hand and said, I owe you $20,000. Will you take 12 right now? And we're going to settle this. And vendor by vendor, they settled their $100,000 for $55,000. And that was a huge shift for them. But it was one-on-one, personal, attacking what their problem was and seeing if they could work it out. Let's talk about, so there is some restructuring, but let's talk about bankruptcy. It is a confusing thing. There's chapter this and chapter that, and many of the lay people out there say, well, the business is in bankruptcy, but they're still operating. Clint, will you describe to us what does it mean? What are the different chapters? Which ones allow you to continue to operate? Which ones are just it's your last will and testament?
Yes. So effectively, for purposes of this call, there are 3 chapters that matter. There's chapter 7, chapter 13, and chapter 11. Overwhelmingly, most bankruptcies are chapter 7 filings, and this is your liquidation. And with respect to a liquidation, what happens is you file, let's say it's your business that files. So your business files, all the assets of your business are then taken over by what's called a trustee, is a third party employed by the court system who then takes the assets and sells them to pay your creditors. Or alternatively, your creditors then get what's called relief from the bankruptcy stay in order to go liquidate your assets themselves. And then the ultimate outcome of that is all the business assets are liquidated. The proceeds of that are then paid to your creditors pursuant to their priority. So your secured creditor is going to get paid from the collateral. The taxes are going to get paid at a priority level, and down the line to general unsecured creditors are going to get a pro rata distribution of anything left over, which is generally pretty close to nothing. So that's chapter 7, which is we have no possible way of reorganizing. The best option for us at this point is just to close the doors, file chapter 7, liquidate the assets, and go on. The next chapter that some may qualify for is going to be chapter 13. And chapter 13 is just for individuals, and individuals that have a relatively small amount of debt. We're talking about a couple $100,000. But in chapter 13, you keep your assets. So if you're a sole proprietor, meaning you don't have another entity organized to run your business, and the business itself does not have a ton of debt, then you may qualify for chapter 13. And in chapter 13, you keep your assets and you pay all of your expendable income into the plan for 5 years. And at the end of that 5 years, you as the individual would then get a discharge of all of your non-secured debt. And there's some other requirements in there too. You got to pay your priority debts, and it's a little more complicated than that. But generally speaking, you pay all your expendable income for 5 years. You get a discharge of all your unsecured debt. And some sole proprietors can use Chapter 13 to reorganize and continue forward. Obviously, it's a small number because you got to be a sole proprietor, you didn't organize a new entity, and also the debt limit is pretty low. The last chapter for reorganization, which most businesses that are trying to reorganize and come out of bankruptcy and operate through bankruptcy, is Chapter 11. And there are two parts of Chapter 11. There's the traditional Chapter 11 for all businesses, and that has unlimited debt amounts. And this is the same chapter that you as a small business owner could file under, or JCPenney files under. It is very expensive under the normal Chapter 11 process to reorganize in bankruptcy. You're talking a minimum $100,000 in attorney's fees under the normal Chapter 11 provisions. That being said, the way that works, you file, you get the automatic stay, all the lawsuits against the business stops, and you can proceed, you proceed in bankruptcy, and you propose a plan. And the plan then has to be consented to by the creditors or meet some other bankruptcy terms in order to force the creditors to accept the plan. And then you make payments to the creditors in accordance with the plan, which are going to be obviously less or drawn out from what you would otherwise have to pay them. There's a new code provision that started in January, just prior to COVID, and then was expanded during COVID for small business Chapter 11s. And I think that the COVID Acts expanded the small business Chapter 11 provisions up to companies that have $5 million in debt. So this is going to apply to a lot of companies. And it's kind of a hybrid between traditional Chapter 11 and Chapter 13. So if you file under the small business Chapter 11, there will be a trustee appointed that takes the asset, that the trustee appointed to oversee the assets. And you're going to file a plan relatively quickly. And you will try to reorganize as a small business Chapter 11. I have not done one of those yet. And in fact, to my knowledge, I think there's only been one small business Chapter 11 that's been confirmed in North Carolina to date. But this option is there. And the concept is to make Chapter 11 reorganization affordable for small businesses with a viable business going forward. Because obviously, if you got to pay $100,000 to reorganize in Chapter 11, that impacts your ability to reorganize in bankruptcy, and ultimately winds up in a situation where businesses that were viable collapse that could be saved. So, that is certainly an option. I imagine a lot of folks on the call might qualify if they have a viable business that can survive through COVID and post-COVID. The other thing, which I hadn't touched on yet, which you will see most of the time, bankruptcy is the last ditch option. You're going to file bankruptcy when you have no other, you've failed to renegotiate outside of bankruptcy. You have lawsuits piling up. Landlords are trying to evict you. Your secured creditor is trying to repossess the assets. And your last possible option, we're going to go to courts, and we're going to have the court deal with this in an orderly process. Sometimes you will see a strategic bankruptcy. Let's say you are in a situation where you owe the landlord $150,000. You owe your vendors $100,000, since those were numbers that were thrown out earlier in the call. And you have a family member that is interested in helping, but isn't interested in helping a situation where they're never going to get repaid. What you can do would be to file a small business Chapter 11, where you have a sale of the business worked out for your to your family member that was willing to put in the money to help you through this. So you file small business Chapter 11, you've got a contract for sale worked out going into the case, You then present the contract to sale to the court and say, this is the best we're ever going to do. It's going to maximize the return to the creditors. And sorry about that. It's going to maximize the return to the creditors. Court, you should bless this sale. The proceeds of the sale are going to go to the creditors, and my family member is now going to own the business going forward, and we'll see if we can make it after that. So there sometimes can be a strategic reason to file bankruptcy other than as a last resort. And I wanted to let folks know that if there's a family member who's interested or somebody else who's interested in helping, you might be able to look at bankruptcy as a way to structuring that makes your business viable going forward.
Can you make a distinction between debts and obligations? So we were talking about you have 100,000 in debt or 5 million in debt, but you might also have 4 years left on a lease that is your house has guaranteed. It's not currently debt, but it is an owed obligation. Tell me, when you were talking about the 5 millions, or you make a distinction between those two?
So with respect to your lease obligations, you're going to be looking at what is currently due in calculating what your debt amount is. If you have already defaulted on your lease and you owe the back due and the landlord has accelerated, then all of that is current debt. But you're looking at your current debt as to what your amount is. With respect to, one other thing to think about in bankruptcy is, let's say you got a 5-year lease. In bankruptcy, that lease will be what's called rejected. And if you cannot pay that lease, so it'll be rejected. And the landlord's claim will be capped at 1 year, which can dramatically reduce the amount owed to the landlord.
I see our first question has appeared. I have a few more, but let's pivot to the final 25 minutes. One of our attendees asked, how do you know when it's time to enter bankruptcy? And I'll add to it, how much lead time? If you decide today to do it, it's not like you can do it tomorrow, right? So how do you know when it's time to enter it? And from the moment you say go, when does the pause button get pushed on all the people you owe?
So first off, how you know, it's going to be twofold. One is if you've exhausted all other options to renegotiate outside bankruptcy, and there's some benefit that you're going to get within bankruptcy, then it's time to file. So first off, you normally want to exhaust all your other options and then file as a last resort. As I previously said, also, sometimes strategically, you can get such a benefit from bankruptcy and restructuring with a deal worked out going in that you can file prior to exhausting all your other options. The lead time, if you called me and said the house is getting ready to be foreclosed on and the lender is getting ready to take all my assets and the sale is going to be tomorrow, I could file an emergency petition, but that would not be desirable. So I would much prefer to have at least 2 weeks to pull all this. One of the things you have to do immediately in bankruptcy is pull what's called the schedules, which set forth what your assets and liabilities are. I would much prefer to have the schedules done and be reasonably confident that what we're filing is accurate before we file. So you need, realistically, a 2-week lead time is really going to be helpful. You can do it much faster than that. You can do it on an emergency basis without schedules, but that makes life on your attorney hard, which ultimately will make life on you hard.
So for the rest of you out there, question and answer, there's a little bubble down at the bottom. You have the opportunity to ask it anonymously or to ask it not anonymously. Neely and Adam, I'll start with you, Neely. Can you talk a little bit about if somebody were to do this, what's the negative impact maybe on them? So, hey, I'm just going to go bankrupt on that, and I'm going to start up a new business right afterwards, right? We're going to shut that one down. It's lost. It's going to do the Chapter 7, and I'm going to cook up a new one right away. Are there negative impacts on the person who did it, on the business, on their ability to start something new?
Well, I think first of all, you have to, Clint may have mentioned there are certain liabilities that are not able to be discharged in bankruptcy. So filing bankruptcy, you may still have liabilities that you're responsible for as an officer owner of the business. I think the next thing that I would just caution, whenever you're starting a new business and you're establishing relationships with landlords or with banks or other vendors, the evidence of bankruptcy and the inquiries that are made about past financial dealings or failures is normally flushed out in trying to establish new relationships. So I'm not saying that you can't go forward with a new business venture, but I think those relationships are harder to establish. There may be some let's say, stricter limitations on vendor debt. There may be additional collateral required in going into, say, a bank relationship. There may be personal guarantees. There may also be, guarantees, personal guarantees against, lease negotiations. So oftentimes you see the bankruptcy filing in a prior period. It does impact you going forward.
Adam?
Yeah, again, mirror Neely, you depending on what type of business you have also, you may have negative impacts to your credit score. You're going to have problems with equity and debt financing going forward. And again, those relationships, depending if you're trying to remain in the same type of business, may be strained going forward, and people will come to understand, how you do business through their due diligence processes. So there are definite negative effects that you need to be aware of and careful about.
If someone does need to start winding down, are there things that they should be doing now, if they see this on the horizon, to protect their kids' college fund, to protect their home, to protect their personal interests? Are there things that you would advise people to do if they're sort of seeing this coming on the horizon?
So the answer to that is, you probably, if you have a substantial amount of debt and a substantial amount of assets, it is worth the time to call a debtor creditor attorney and start looking through what is going to be the most effective way to wind the business down. And one thing in particular, a lot of the assets you just discussed are going to be exempt. So even if you've personally guaranteed the debt, you're going to have a significant exemption in the equity of your home. You're going to have all of your retirement assets are going to be exempt. So making sure, and then a good chunk of your kids' college funds will be exempt too. So making sure that we aren't using exempt assets to pay debts is going to be helpful to you in winding it down as cheaply as possible, and having an attorney help you negotiate and help you figure out what's the best way to use the assets we have to wind it down in a way that impacts you as little as possible. Now, that being said, it's going to be expensive to wind your business down. You're going to lose money. It is not going to be a pleasant experience at all. But we can come up with strategies that help minimize the impact as much as it can be minimized.
One of the places I've seen people get in trouble is when they poorly planned for it, right? Employees show up one day, there's a lock on the door. And the challenge then comes with unemployment. Like they weren't paying they'd stop paying their withholdings. They'd stop. Like, do you have any advice what not to do as this comes? what to make sure that you are doing as if you see this on the horizon? Go ahead, Clint.
So you did a great job at the beginning explaining what not to do, which is bury your head in the sand, wait, just hope that things are going to get better, and then wait till the last possible day when the lender or the landlord has come and locked your door, and then trying to untangle the mess that occurs then is going to be the most expensive way for you to deal with this. And it's going to cause the most hardship on all of your creditors and on all of your employees. So if you're on this call, I assume that this is an issue for you. What you need to be doing now is looking at your debts, looking at your assets, looking at your cash flow, making a realistic decision, can I make it through this? And then if you can't, then you need to start planning now as to how I'm going to wind this down in an orderly fashion. Because doing things in an ordered way is ultimately going to benefit you and everyone who you're dealing with to the best extent possible.
As I understand it, but well, much of our community, many of our local employers are nonprofits. Nonprofits may also go through this bankruptcy process. When nonprofits do it badly, they leave their board members on the hook, right? If your CEO, if you guys go bankrupt as a nonprofit, the executive director gets terminated or quits and leaves all the obligations. The individual board members have some personal responsibility for those. Is that not true?
It can be true under certain circumstances. If you breached your fiduciary duties to the nonprofit, you can wind up being personally responsible for the wind up of the nonprofit. I'd have to do some more research as to what exactly those scenarios are, but it certainly can happen. And then obviously, as you pointed out earlier, the payroll taxes, if you're the control person associated with the same, then you're going to be personally liable if those aren't paid. So there definitely are scenarios where you as the nonprofit board member could become personally liable for the debt. I'd have to do more research to figure out exactly what all those scenarios are.
We want to make sure everybody's got their periscope up, right? We need to be looking downfield, dealing with this current challenge that we're in, but also smartly looking up every once in a while to see what is coming on the horizon and to make good choices about these next couple of months. What other questions do folks have? Folks on the call, if you want to drop your question in that Q&A. Adam, from your experience or what you guys are seeing at SBTDC now, any lessons learned, any advice that you would be giving people facing some revenue that is less than expenses, where your revenue is currently less than your expenses?
Right. Again, you got to look at your burn rate, on a periodic basis and see how much cash you have on hand. That's just good business to do. But to the extent you can, some of the things we've talked about, slashing your overhead, control the costs you can control. Don't worry about the ones you can't for the time being. Try to prioritize those debts in the same manner that Clint had said. If you have a viable plan to stay in business during COVID and after COVID, make sure you prioritize those debts that'll keep you in business. There's also potential, if you have business insurance, do you have a business interruption policy or a rider on your insurance plan that may help you out? Again, there may be some funding options too that are out there, either from a loan or grant perspective, and those there may be more coming up. So you just have to keep your eye on things. Visit the SBTDC website. I know I'm shamelessly plugging again, but we have resources that we try to keep up to date on the website too, that'll allow you to navigate through the multiple different places that you might be able to go. The SBA website, some of the different local jobs retention grant, that type of thing that you'll find from North Carolina. And then even on a more local basis, you can drill down into different local offices depending on where you are. Obviously, we're at the UNC Central Region location, but will be specific things that are available to different counties, even different municipalities. So just keep an eye out there and see where there might be help, and contact us so we can help counsel you and help you find those things.
So let's pause there and let me hit a few that are currently available. The Economic Injury Disaster Loan, easy to find. You'll just go to the SBA's website, big banner at the top. It's called the EIDL loan or the EIDL loan. It no longer has a grant. You may have heard that there's this up to $10,000 grant that has expired, but you may borrow up to $150,000. A for-profit will have a 3.75% interest rate. A nonprofit will have a 2.75% interest rate. There is no payments for a year, and you have a 30-year term. Essentially, that's $600 a month for the rest of your life. But you can forward yourself $150,000 today to help address, and that is the best term and the best interest rate that I've seen in 20 years on a commercial loan. If you've not investigated that, please investigate that. If you have questions, call the 1-800 number. Even if they tell you that you're number 900 in line, they have a good set of staff, and the queue clears pretty quickly. For those of you who are watching this live, you have 2 more days to apply for North Carolina's Job Retention Grant. It is only for companies that did not get PPP. So if you did not do the PPP, and you did not do what's called a Main Street loan, and nobody did, and if you did not do, and there's a third kind of loan, which I've not met anybody who did. So essentially, if you did not do PPP, you had at least a 10% loss in revenue over the 3 months. You kept 90% of your staff. If 90% of the FTEs on May 30th, it's the same as it was in February, then you're eligible for this. It's a grant. It's up to $250,000. It's going to be essentially equivalent to 2 months of your organization's payroll expenses, including insurance, including payroll taxes, including retirement, plus 25%. So 2 months of payroll plus 25%, and it's a guaranteed issue. So it's not competitive. If you qualify, you'll get it. There's only $15 million. We expect it to be oversubscribed, but they'll just simply prorate people. So if twice the amount of people apply for it, then you'll get half of what was coming your way. But it is due in 2 days. It only takes, doesn't take very long to fill it out. Go to North Carolina Department of Commerce. It's the big banner at the top. There will also be some additional local loan and local grant options, so keep your eyes open for those. The town of Chapel Hill will stand up shortly a micro grant program to support businesses purchasing of equipment or PPE that they need in order to be successful. That application will probably come live in the next 10 days. Are there other sources of revenue that you guys are aware of? Do you want to share?
I just think we have to pay close attention to legislative discussions, and our hope is that we will get something available, I guess, in the month of September. If we aren't successful, then I think the likelihood maybe be deferred, later into 2020. But again, I think the North Carolina Department of Commerce program, Aaron, that you mentioned, I know you mentioned 2 days. I guess you're referring to 2 business days.
Yes, September 1 is the due date.
Right.
So 3 days.
We don't have to apply by Sunday. So there is some time early next week. Mm-hmm.
Correct. It is September 1 is the due date with no extensions. So there's no exceptions and no extensions. Mm-hmm. September 1. I should have described it that way. Thank you, Neely.
Aaron, there is some payroll deferment provisions that are available. So if you're having cash flow problems, you're able to defer your employer payroll taxes. And we haven't seen a lot of people take advantage of that, but still, when you're talking about difficult cash flow, you're basically allowed to just defer those. Those will ultimately be repaid or need to be repaid, but it basically is an interest-free type period that you can push those off. And then I think it's the end of 2021 is where you have to address the repayment of those.
Any other information like that folks have managing tough cash flow?
I don't know if it's exactly related, but I will make a small point that in bankruptcy under that subchapter 5 that Clint was talking about, I think there's the provision that some of this funding that you might have received wouldn't count as income in your calculation of determining viability. So you may be able to get some of this and then it not count against you essentially if you have to go into the bankruptcy process.
Clint, you want to speak to that?
Adam is exactly right. So subchapter 5 is the small business chapter 11 that I was just discussing. And so this came out in January, right before COVID. As I said, it had a lower debt limit. Then as part of some of the COVID legislation, the debt limit was raised. And one of the other matters that was addressed was whether PPP funds and similar type things would count as income that would knock you out as a small business debtor. And the answer to that was addressed and said, no, if you were a small business debtor before, you're going to remain a small business debtor after.
We did not talk about personal bankruptcy. We did talk briefly about for sole proprietors. Clint, do you want to make a distinction for folks who are, how about, let me ask it this way. An LLC can sometimes feel very personal, right? All of the cash is simply passing through, they're recording it on their personal income taxes. Is a bankruptcy for an LLC any different than a sole proprietor? Is it a personal bankruptcy or a corporate one?
Well, so the answer, I mean, the answer is kind of yes and no. I mean, if your LLC files, that is your business filing. It is not your person. It's not you personally filing. So it's not your personal assets that are going into the bankruptcy case. With respect to the bankruptcy code, under Chapter 11 and Chapter 7, there's no difference in how the bankruptcy operates with respect to whether it was your LLC filed or you individually. You're still going to have to comply with all of the same requirements. Chapter 13, businesses, LLCs, entities are not eligible. It's only individuals. So basically what this boils down to, I kind of went around in a circle there. I'm assuming that it is your business and you have a separate entity that is going to be filing bankruptcy. There are times absolutely where you, the individual, has personally guaranteed so many of your business debts that you also personally wind up having to file bankruptcy because of the failure of the business. And in that scenario, you're going to be eligible under 7 or 11 or 13, if applicable, to file personally with your business also filing a separate case. Did that answer your question, Aaron?
It did. That's it. That helped to answer a question that we had heard from others. We have 5 minutes to go. We're going to sort of close out with maybe an around the horn. Do you have, if somebody with real challenges is sitting in front of you, any different than what you've already said, you're going to give them 3 or 4 things to do right now. What would those be?
I'll go first. And I guess if your business is stressed out, you're looking at closure, you think you can't sustain through this COVID period, I would just encourage you to take a close look at your liabilities. I think we see oftentimes people try to work through this themselves independently, whether it's pride, whether it's possible cost savings. But for example, if you've got a bank loan, you need to understand what business assets collateralize that loan. And in liquidating those assets, you have to understand that the bank has a preferential claim to that. You also have to understand where your personal guarantees are and possible family member guarantees, because we have a lot of situations where non-owner or family members may have tried to support early on the business, so that you may have some family members with personal guarantees that you just don't remember. There are covenants in loans, so be careful as you try to work through it. Loan violations and covenant violations can have negative consequences. So I would I oftentimes just ask, as Clint said, you need to probably reach out to a third party. It's worth a brief consultation with someone like in Clint's position to really help you work through maybe dissolving or unwinding your business.
Adam?
Yeah, I mean, this is somewhat of a reiteration, but I think communication with all parties, whether it's your debtors, your suppliers, your customers, or your staff, having an open dialogue to help them understand where you're coming from and to see what assistance they might be able to offer you is a good place to start and a good place to stay in, because you never know where you might have assistance. Customers set up crowdfunding for businesses they really can get behind and they want to stay in the area. That may be something that happens, but I think without the open communication and not letting people know where you're at and that you're potentially having problems, they don't know that they can help you one way or the other.
That's very helpful. Clint, any final advice from you?
No, I think I've already kind of reiterated the points I wanted to make. Was that if you're in a cash flow scenario, You need to sit down and take a realistic look. What are your assets? What are your liabilities? Do you have a plan forward? And from there, once you are addressing the issue head on, you can get the assistance you need to figure out what the best plan is.
If folks need help, please, and you're not sure who to call about it, you're welcome to reach out to the staff at the chamber. So we'd be happy to take that call, help connect you with one of these folks here on the call, to others in our community that can be helpful. You should not go this alone. This is not a time to be Lone Rangering this activity. So be engaging with your network, talk to the people who you trust, seek advice from the community and from professionals. If at the chamber we can be helpful for you on areas of reducing costs or conversations about market conditions and what's happening, please let us know. Coming up on the 10th of September is the Chamber State of the Community Report. That is going to be a deep dive. Our State of the Community Report will have 300 indicators about what's going on in our community economically, with respect to real estate, with respect to our schools, community, transportation, migration, commuting, etc. The presentation itself will review 100 key community indicators and give you a sense of where we're going. Maybe that will be helpful for you and your business. The Chamber's website is full of resources, including a guide to reopening called reopeninghelp.com, where you can navigate there from the Chamber site. And then if we can help you reduce costs through on healthcare or health insurance or credit card processing or PPE purchasing, if there's things that we can be assisting you with, please reach out to the Chamber staff, to me personally. We'll be happy to help you. A special thank you again to Neely McLaughlin with Blackman and Sloop. Decades of experience here in our community. He understands this market. He understands the needs of small business. And it's a powerful team at Blackman and Sloop who can assist you. Lots of staff people there, partners and professionals with great Chapel Hill experience. Adam, we're glad that you are the newest to our community, but bringing substantial experience as a CPA, but now applying that in a service from the university that is designed to help the small businesses of our community. And Clint, your firm, Brooks Pierce, incredible reputation across the state, long relationship with our chamber and our community. We're grateful for your time and for the advice that you were able to give the attendees of this call. For those of you on the call, you'll likely get a survey afterwards for feedback on how we can improve these. Look for information about other ones coming up. We'll give you a copy of this recording and the contact information for those that were on the call. Everybody be well, please. Stay safe. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.